Yes. I'm very pleased to have Laura Rister here with me today. She's one of my dear colleagues. She's a producer and financier, which, as you guys know, is very rare. Normally, we have producers that go make the content financiers, that contact them to see if they want to invest in the film. And then you have investors that invest in film. Rarely do we have both in one person. So now we have both in one person with Laura here, and I'm very excited about that. So I'm going to ask Laura some questions about her career, her background, what she's doing, some advice she has for us. So I'm going to dive right in. Laura, what brought you to Hollywood and what inspired you to become a producer?
Sure. So my first love was journalism. And I thought I was going to take a broadcast media path. I definitely planned to be behind the camera, by the way. I wanted to produce stories. I loved 60 Minutes. I loved, long form journalism, but I was working in CNN in Washington on short, that 24/7 news cycle. And I knew at some point I would burn out, but I loved being a part of telling the stories. I mean, just stories, the journalism and film stories, even though we're talking about two different things, you'll see the correlation in a minute. But basically, after a while, that burnout factor that I was worried would be coming, I had an opportunity to start looking into some Hollywood jobs in both Los Angeles and New York. And I was attracted to a job working for a studio that, was Miramax Films. And Miramax at the time was telling, interesting, provocative stories about subjects and people that we didn't know about, right? Oftentimes. And I thought, here's a way where I could put a story, put a film into the world that has longevity, that becomes part of the time capsule, and can also touch on subjects that are moving people. I used the example recently. I was talking about Conclave and how I would have loved to have made that movie. When the Pope died, how many people knew about the conclave because of the film? They didn't know about it before, and then they became utterly obsessed with all of the little details surrounding it simply because they had this great opportunity to see this film that opened the door to them doing a deep dive on their own research around the subject. So I like that complementary aspect of film as well. I also think that it can make change, social change, political change, and so that's the short answer is, or the longer short answer is that I saw something to indulge my curiosity and in film that I thought I could, have a long run with.
You really are a storyteller at heart, and I love the fact that you're focusing on stories that can have longevity. So, looking at your impressive career, what would be one of the movies you would say is the one you're most proud of, or where you really believe you created that kind of change or time capsule aspect with one of your projects? I know you did a lot of amazing projects, but what is one that kind of stands out for you personally?
Sure. It's difficult for me to say one. So
I
maybe
know you did so many.
maybe I'll just do two that,
Yeah,
that kind of
please.
because for different reasons. So I'll just
Yeah.
do it in the chronology of when they came out. So Margin Call. When I met JC Shandor, who came with this story, first time feature filmmaker, by the way, first time writer, first time director, had no representation. What I loved about it was here we had an opportunity to shine a spotlight on the 2008 financial crisis, but through a taut, dramatic thriller where you really get a sense of all of the people and personalities involved and understand the crux of what went down through what was a fictional take on a real story. And so I thought that was really terrific. And we happened to luck out in that when we premiered at Sundance, and that fall was Occupy Wall Street. So we released at a time when it was in the zeitgeist. And then we had an Oscar nomination and terrific success on the day and date platform, one of the first success stories of
Right.
theatrical and streaming and VOD. And so there's just a whole lot of things that it came with that film, which we made for 3.5 million gross, I might add, in New York. Yeah.
I did not know
And
that.
yeah. And then
Amazing.
and to this day, people talk about that with me,
Yes.
throughout the year. And then the other one I would note is The Tale. The Tale is a film I made and it came out in 2018. And it was the filmmaker, Jennifer Fox, was telling her own story of abuse, her own story of survival. And she had Laura Dern playing her. And here is this filmmaker telling her story through the lens of Laura Dern's character. And she went to investigate her own past, her own story, her own truth. And one of the major kind of headlines of this film is that it is kind of, it's a spotlight on this idea that we are, we're the narrators of our own lives, and we often can be an unreliable narrator, whether or not it's from a result of trauma or something else. You just, you tell it the way you remember it. And you might be damn certain that it was exactly that it happened exactly that way, but did it? And so it captured a few things that we made there was a lot of conversation around abuse and trauma, and the idea of grooming, by the way, because she was groomed by her coach. And and we came out around when the Me Too movement kicked off. So we premiered right around that time, again, a moment. And I remember the gymnastics team was going through their own stories of being groomed by their doctor. And so we became part of that conversation. We screened at the UN. We had all kinds of organizations supporting us and sponsoring us, and we've been in classrooms. So it's just a film that continues to give back in that way. And we sold it to HBO Global instead of going theatrical, in part because we wanted people to be able to screen it in the comfort and safety of their own homes. There were a number of people that survivors that told us they might feel very triggered trying to watch that in a theater full of people. They needed to see it in the relative safety of their home. So,
amazing. And both of those are, I would consider them absolute time capsules, particularly at the time they came out, particularly the conversations that they initiated. Fantastic films. So when we talk about what you enjoy most, we kind of answered that because you do like stories that do have a longevity and do inspire thinking and critical thinking. In addition to that, is there anything you do like about your work? I mean, working as a producer is hard, so we know that,
yeah.
but what is your kind of like favorite thing to do? Let's put it this way, in that work.
I'll just say I'm always learning.
Hmm.
I am indulging my deep sense of curiosity. Just, you have to be I think to be a good producer, you should be, and to enjoy what you do as a producer, you should be very curious about the world, people, and everything that you're experiencing. I love the travel aspect. I happen to be someone who tends to do films all over the world and will continue to do that. So there's that, and you get to experience places and people and stories in the culture and settings of where you're shooting. So I highly recommend that. And no day is the same. So there's nothing boring about what we do. We might have something on the emotional spectrum that's a little roller coastery, from the highs and the lows and the stresses and all of that. But no day is the same. So you could never say that you're bored doing what we do. And then, as I noted earlier, I love uncovering stories. When I get a call about some new project, or I find a book or a news article or a short story or whatever it might be, of something that I didn't know about before that I should, or at least I think I should have known, or how do more people not talk about this? I love stories, and I love to bring them to light. And I'm doing that with a few upcoming projects.
That's fantastic, and I'm going to be curious to hear about them and watch them. So obviously, being a producer, it does have its challenges. What are some of the challenges that you would say you have faced that were a little difficult, if you want to share those?
Sure. So as someone who's been primarily, even though I worked for a studio, I've worked longer as an independent producer. And I'd say one of the biggest challenges has been, not just finding financing and jumping through all the hoops that you need to do to figure out how to put the financing together on a project, but working with the right people, because you might have financiers that, and you'll understand why later, why I have my own financing that I rose behind myself. But working with difficult, there's not always, integrity is not always at the forefront sometimes. And so you really want to work with collaborative people, and you want to work with people who are in the business for the right reasons. And, so working with difficult financing, chasing financing, those have been some of the bigger struggles. The rest of it, I kind of just roll with, whether it's losing an actor and having to replace them to the timing of something not going when it needs to go. You have to just be really resilient and flexible and patient. I've been fortunate to consistently be employed in this business and to adjust for this business in order to do that. So I haven't had the challenges of the business disrupt things for me too much. The pandemic, of course, made things tricky for all of us, but.
Right. So talking about the changes, pandemic is one thing, but really the changes our industry went through, and we had a few, which forced us to do all kinds of nonsense and adjust as producers. How would you say those changes impacted you, and how did you navigate them?
Okay, so which changes specifically?
We're talking about specifically, the first change that I went through was when you were not able to really get the pricing for licensing deals anymore. So with the streamers coming into play, viewer behavior is changing, but really the outcome was licensing pricing was going down and we were forced to lower budgets. The other changes are that, the buyers have changed, their appetite has changed. We're not talking to people that, in the studio times, people that understood story. We're now talking to people that, are doing algorithms. So there is a bit of, I believe, changing going on in the industry that impacts storytelling in some form, but also impacts financing. At least for me, it did. Maybe it was different for you.
Yeah. Well, I'd say we're going through it right now, significant changes. So maybe I'll speak to that.
Yeah.
Increasingly we're looking at a theatrical market that's very tricky. There might be a weird situation often where you've got a film, and I've been saying this on a few projects of late when I've seen new things. I say, if it works, it's executed well, you could have a streamer, Netflix or Amazon or, HBO Max steps up for it. But if they don't, then it could be that same film that could be bought for a significant amount of money by one of those streamers and have a nice life on streaming might also, if it doesn't get bought by them, suddenly it is interesting to a smaller pool of theatrical distributors in terms of how much they're buying. So you might be offered a zero minimum guarantee up front, because they have to put the money that they would otherwise put into an MG into the P&A. So they justify their spend on the P&A, but your investors, your project is, how do you recoup that investment unless there's real success? And we're in a market where it's anybody's guess when something's going to break through theatrically. You've got the big tentpoles, as always, and then you have, exceptions, but not a lot of films, I think, are really breaking through at the box office if they're, classically independent films. But even studios are seeing their movies not take off. So it's a very uncertain market. And so, as you and I know, Jeanette, you look to the foreign market usually to mitigate your risk. But even then, the foreign market is going to follow how the US market performs. And so everything's being affected across the board. A lot of films that you might take a chance on the past, you just can't, And so you have to look at what's working and genre-wise. But even that can be a mistake, right? Because everyone was thinking horror genre. Well, now there's a glut of horror genre. So some are not going to make it through. So I'd say you have to rely on singular voices, really look for unique stories, bet on the certain, filmmakers, and you have to make your films for a smart budget, really offset the risk with significant soft money if you can, incentives. It's trickier to do in the US, as we know, because there are only certain, you can tap into the incentives in any given state. But if you're looking at Europe or Australia, for instance, you can find a way to cover a big swath of your budget with soft monies and government support. So you have to try to do everything you can to mitigate your exposure. So it's challenging.
Yeah, so the financing market definitely has changed, and non-recoverable finance sources, I believe, do play a more important role today than they ever did for the reasons that you mentioned. So you are one of the few producers that established an investment fund. What led you to the step to begin with? I mean, you talked about it a little bit, but in your own words, what would you say was the factor that says, I'm just going to find my own money. I'm done with this. I'm done asking people for money. So
Yeah.
what was that?
So, after years of, I always was, I don't think there are a lot of producers out there, independent producers that were both creative producers and raising their own financing, packaging them their own financing, packaging their cast. But
Right.
I've always done that. It just kind of was my modus operandi. So I've always done that. So I knew the market, I knew the foreign sales companies, I knew the investors, and I was, structuring the financing, bringing money into projects. And I'd see the investors doing better, than me as a producer, because the producers, we have to squeeze ourselves in these budgets to make them work. And so I thought, well, why don't I just raise my own funding, and also so that I can create something more sustainable for myself. Because what I decided to do was raise financing behind myself to be able to finance films. But also I'm thinking it's more of a global ecosystem where I have partners in the UK and Australia. And the goal is to have sustainable revenue streams by, producing what's meaningful to me, that I think will work, in the market as well. And then EP and financing as well, projects where I trust the team implicitly that's on the project, know that they're going to be collaborative and communicate, and have multiple projects going on during the year. That's the goal. So I can create a larger business, effectively like being a producer with a studio, right? I also wanted to kind of have a no asshole policy, and to the extent you can, it's kind of idealistic because they're always going to surface. But if you are controlling the purse strings, you can create healthier. In theory, you can create healthier environments on your films, because at some point in your career, you just don't want to work. You want to enjoy what you're doing.
Correct.
And if you're stressed out about, toxic situations or personalities, which are, there are a lot of in this business, I think it really burns people out, for good reason.
Yeah, no, and I've seen it. I can relate to that. And also at some point, and I'm now, as I mentioned to you, I'm 60 and some, no, 60 right now, getting there. But at this point in my life, I also want to just do what I want to do with who I want to do it with.
Yes.
So I can totally understand that. I know your goal for your fund is not just to support producers, but also make sure that investors are not taken to the cleaners, if we may say
Yes.
so. Are you able to share some advantages of your fund with advantages for producers and investors,
Yes.
the way you structured it?
Yeah. So, I did this before, and even more so now. I treat my investors like it's my money. I need to. I've never understood those that don't, how they can wake up, in the morning knowing that they might have lost money for their investors. I don't understand that.
Yeah.
So I've always gone into projects with that kind of thinking. Of course, it's not a perfect science. It happens, but you try to do everything you can. So we had time to kick the tires on the model we were building. And, I first thought, okay, well, we'll work with certain foreign sales companies where I trust their numbers. And since we have to, in the independent film space, you really do need to understand what the foreign and US value might be on a project. So as long as you understand what the collateral is on the world, that was key. And then maximize soft monies was another principle. And then smart finance plans and smart budgets. And so the fund itself is designed to finance everything from the soft money, the senior against contracts, foreign sales, or US backstops, for instance. And then we can do super gap. And that super gap is defined as up to 50% of the estimates of only those trusted foreign sales companies, right? And even then, because I understand the foreign sales market, I'm able to kind of discount those numbers myself further. For instance, France does sometimes just sells for zero. It doesn't sell. So even though you've got numbers listed on a sales sheet on the low for France, sometimes that low in my mind is actually zero, because it just doesn't always, they just don't always It's just what happens. So keeping that in mind. So what that means is we have a leveraged debt fund in order to do that. There's one other thing that we're willing to do, and that's bridge during pre-production. And the reason for that is because I myself over the years have needed, as I'm closing all my financing for a film, I've got all these different, finance parties at the table, and no one will spend $1 until everyone closes and hits that strike price. So what do you do if you're, it's all chicken and egg, right? You need to be prepping your movie in order to be able to get everything done and closed and move forward. So that pre-production loan, I find, is something that's essential to a lot of films, but you can pick and choose which projects you feel comfortable doing that with. And you have to look at the financing that's in place. There's a lot of diligence that goes into that. But what that bridging does is also brings capital back into the fund, turning around profits quicker than your, say, 18 months that you're going to wait for your film investments to come back, right?
Right. Exactly.
So that's the basic structure of it. And then wherever we need to syndicate out to outside equity to round out a finance plan, I can do that. I'll go to sources that I have, that I've always had, or new ones. Or I'll work with the agency that's involved, or another producing partner who's good at this, producing and financing. And together we get it done. It all goes back to a collaborative environment. And if you're working with collaborative, effective partners who all bring something to the table, you can figure that out.
So in essence, you're a one-stop shop. So producer comes to you and says, I have some pre-sales. I'm working with a bankable sales agent. I do need bridge because I know I'm going to be in pre-production and I know the bond is going to take their sweet time. So I need bridging. You have potential incentives that you can fund. So basically every step of the way, producers could basically do everything with you. They
Yes.
don't need to go anywhere else.
Yeah.
They basically can get every part of the financing from you if that is possible, if you like the project and if you like the estimates and if you like the sales agents. I mean, there's a lot of ifs, but theoretically it sounds like you could be a one-stop shop for the producer. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. And then I will also, as I've told other companies that I think are like-minded, run by, people I respect with similar interests and similar interest in film and stories, that we can finance together too. So then you co-finance with partners. So I can come at things in any different way. And I was just having a conversation with one of the packaging agents, the other day, and we were just kind of, brainstorming together what the best finance plan was for a particular film that I might consider. And then, of course, I have my own projects that I'm building from the ground up that I'm saying, well, I'm prepared to finance or co-finance this. But what happens is it might end up going studio or streamer, or it could be a larger budget. Like our film fund is really designed currently for budgets from 5 to 20 million, let's say. So something over 20 million, I might be working with a different partner on, but that could change in the near future as we grow.
And also, if producers have equity already, which some of them do, and just need help with structuring the rest around it, that's something that could be of interest. And then investors who don't always just want, I mean, they want to be equity, we have those, but they also want to up the game a little bit by investing into other sectors as well, because then they can recoup earlier, they can make some money on like the loan part of it, the pre-sale part of it, which normally they're not privy to, because normally that piece is taken by the bank, and banks are usually just taking it all, and then this equity investor sits behind the bank. So there are some equity investors that might want to move up the waterfall ladder a little bit. Is that correct? And one can offer that to them, moving up the waterfall, that is.
Yes.
Yes. Well, that's I think that's significant because it doesn't always work. So, when we talk about risk mitigating factors, I think the main risk mitigating factor, if I understand you correctly, would be incentives and also a smart finance plan, as well as the budget being smart. So when you look at a
collateral on the world as well, understanding really what the value is, right?
I was going there. So what do you like to see? What would you consider, if you could define it in the ideal world, be a financially valuable movie to you, if you can define that?
Okay. Starts with the filmmaker. I'd say the filmmaker, you really believe in this filmmaker, and you believe that his or her their vision is one that is going to deliver on what they promise.
Right.
Right? That's first and foremost. That's, you got to execute. You know, it can
Correct.
look like something that's great on paper, and you know, assess it all you want with projections and what have you, but that's first and foremost.
Right.
Smart finance plan, smart budget, really putting the money on screen. And then from there, I'd say I think it's difficult to say a specific genre, you know? Obviously you're going to lean, the more you can bank more on things that have, you know, some sort of commercial genre aspect to them. But as we know, you get a prestige film that gets, you know, critical attention, and it can be riding all the way through, you know, award season, and people want to come out and see that film as well. So in terms of the smart, perfect thing, you know, that's it's tough to define. I'd say one of those two things. The other thing would be IP driven, right?
Right.
Well-known IP driven project obviously works, whether that might be a book or, I mean, the other things tend to be much bigger budget. So those are more in the studio space, but, you know, graphic novels and, you know, legendary IP. And what am I missing? I would just say those are the key things, you know.
Right.
You
So
need to know, oh, and casting.
yeah,
So
that's what I was asking.
yeah, if casting's huge, of course, it always has been, let's be honest. And it's very frustrating when you know that someone is going to break through. You know that they're going to have value in a minute, right? And yet you can't assess any value on them until after they've had the success.
Right.
So sometimes I want people to just bank on, you know, on the potential of someone that I'm predicting is going to have a really great career, you know, because it also, some of the marketing and the narrative around the support for that project might be about, oh my God, this find, this discovery, you know, this, you know, is going to be tremendous. There's more attention given to that person than somebody who's already been out, you know, as a quote unquote star for a while, if they're, you know, doing a part in a film that you expect them to do, right?
Yeah. So would you say that producers should pay a little attention to at least having someone recognizable in one of the leading roles, maybe spending some money there? Would you say that that would be a good step?
They have to. You know, it's funny. I'm looking at a project right now that is very good. This filmmaker's very good, but in this particular market, the reason that it is something that I would consider investing in, and foreign sales is able to do any kind of numbers on, is simply based on the two actors that are attached right now.
Yeah.
It's all about the actors being attached because they're magic, these two actors.
Right.
And if and you can see the movie through them. If it's not them, you'd have to reassess. So, and unfortunately, you know, the reality is that, you know, sales are still primarily driven by who's in it. Now, you might be able to have a horror film that's not completely reliant on names, but then it would have to be a very unique concept, and or, you know, Jordan Peele, or, you know, very bankable, because then the filmmaker becomes the talent, right?
Right.
If you
Correct.
can finance, you can absolutely bet on Quentin Tarantino or Jordan Peele, or you know what I'm saying? You can
Yeah.
do that. And whomever they want to put in their movie might be okay.
Right. Exactly. So last but not least, last question I have for you is, if you would have a crystal ball and could see where the industry is going, what would that be, and what advice would you give to producers and investors in connection to that?
Sure. Well, on the one hand, I mean, I wish I had a crystal ball to predict predict it all. So that's the first thing. Anyone who says they do, I think, would be, you know, kind of lying, maybe. You know, not everything's surprising in this business, right? But I would say one thing that I think probably will happen is we want to protect the ability to have a theatrical experience, right? We still need to have movies in the theaters, but yet increasingly it's becoming very unsustainable on its own, and it's so expensive to go to the movies. And so
Right.
people justify going to see movies like they used to if they have to spend $100 for two people at the Grove,
Yeah.
once you get your concessions, right?
Right.
And so I'd say I think the streamers and the theatrical might, there might be more, consolidation so that the streamers can keep the theatrical experience alive. But their bread and butter, the real success and the real money will be in the of the content on their streaming platforms. That's one guess, is that they'll do more of that, the alignment of theatrical distributors and streamers. I also think there will be more bundling, by the way. You know how in DirecTV, it used to have cable bundling all of your channels. Now I think there will probably be bundling of streamers in the future. I don't have the answer on what this will mean, but I think, you have to look at what people are wanting to consume, and you look at the streamers and you say, they want K-pop Demon Hunters, and they want, they want certain kinds of, comfort, easy, escapist fare. So you have to keep that in mind. But every once in a while, you're going to have, total breakthroughs, Baby Reindeer, things like that surprise. But how do people adjust? I think you just have to read the tea leaves, be resilient, be, multifaceted as a producer, work with experienced producers. I too often see, and this is, the investors, they're the investors and they're the producers, and investors, I often meet investors after they've already been burned.
Yeah.
And I'm like, why on earth did they go and work with, if someone was working with them that told them the risk that they were putting their money, in this particular project, then they probably wouldn't have done that. And it's always unfortunate when they've been burned, because then they think the film business is just utterly and totally risky and they're over it.
Yeah.
And or they come back and they're all airtight in their approach, so much so that there's no fun in it. So
Yeah.
I think it's about, working with experienced producers who actually care about protecting their investment. For producers, whether or not you have investment behind you, I think it's important, even more so now, to be part of a community of, kind of brain trust and people to be sounding boards, and to ask about how to address certain problems, because there's always hiccups and there's always setbacks. And so you need to don't work as a lone wolf, and I was guilty of that in the past. I would do that a lot. I don't know why. I just, kind of just trusted my instincts and plowed forward. But more so now, I'm part of something called Producers United. And, we all bounce off of each other all the time now, which I'm finding to be a really glorious thing, to have that community. But speaking to instincts, trust your instincts, So if you are skittish about something, nervous about it, you might very well be, it would be a good idea to trust it, to take a step back,
And that goes for investors as well as producers, you say?
Both.
Yeah.
For producers, it's about creatively trusting your instincts and betting on something. For investors, it's about trusting your instincts on the whole canvas of both the project and the people involved, and feeling comfortable with your investment. There's certain people, certain investors that might want to take that flyer and give it a go on something. But if your interest is in sustainability in the business, you want to be careful, make wise choices, and proceed cautiously.
Right.
Well,
I do think that the marketplace today gives us challenges, and I think your advice in being a little intuitive about the decisions and surrounding yourself as investors with experienced producers, also knowing what to ask for, and also kind of knowing what not to ask for, what is appropriate, what is not appropriate. And I think a little bit of education there could come from a producer that is familiar with what investors should have and how to protect them. So I think you saying being intuitive is important, but also not, because you've had a bad experience, now locking everything down and,
Yeah.
I don't think that is the answer either. So I'm glad you mentioned that. You answered pretty much
Can I
all my
add one
questions.
more
Yeah.
thing? Which is
Yeah.
experienced producers doesn't just mean, and I can say this because I'm thinking about a particular project, doesn't
Yeah.
mean just somebody who's had all the accolades and been doing it for a long time. Because if they've been working in the comfort of the studio system and had, budgets that they wanted and, all the resources, when they go to step into independent film, they still command this idea that they know what they're doing. But at the end of the day, their budget and their finance plan may not make sense. And
Right.
so they're not thinking about the investors losing money. I watched it firsthand on not my project, thankfully, but somebody else's. And they were so insistent that they had to make it for a certain budget, which they didn't have to. You could see why they didn't. There were ways that they could have made it for less. And for some reason, it was almost like that studio mentality of, well, the studio just loses. They win some, they lose some, it's, they just see how it goes. But private investment, investors in the independent space, if you lose them money, that's, could be devastating to them, but it also could be, you burned any desire from those investors to do another film. Who knows? But they absolutely, there are certain, those producers who are experienced, they still need to have a clear sense of the independent film space and understand what the value is in the marketplace. All of those things are incredibly important.
Yeah. I do agree with you. Studio producers do not necessarily know how to structure an independent finance plan. I mean, they know, how to make projects that hopefully create box office revenues, but box office doesn't really mean much for an independent producer because we're selling license, right? So
Yeah.
we may or may not get some of that.
Yeah.
So I think that's a very important addition when it comes to who to trust and what is an independent producer, or what is a producer that has experience. Would you have anything to add? I really appreciate all the wisdom and the valuable insights you're giving us here. Is there anything you feel you should add that would be important to producers or investors?
Sure. I would say, and this is something I can say now, being in the position I'm in, producing and financing, sometimes wearing both hats, sometimes wearing one or the other, is now I'm also looking to bet on the upside, right? So I'm trying to not just think about where I'm going to just recoup for the investors and make a small profit, but what could really break through. Because if you have those breakthrough projects that do significantly well in the box office or streaming, that then can help sustain so many other things that you want to do afterwards. So that's one thing, really looking for those projects that might really break through. And oftentimes, as we noted earlier, it's intuition, it's, your instincts about it, and the desire to see something, the audience craving that. And then the other thing I would just say for everybody, for producers and investors, I always like to say, you need to have equal parts, patience, tenacity, you know, um, persistence. You need to have a balance, because you'll drive yourself crazy if you don't, understand that there are going to be, long delays on things and things out of your control. But if you believe in something, you stick with it.
It's a very good point, and I think it's absolutely correct. Laura, I want to thank you for taking the time today to give us this beautiful, insightful, and truly valuable interview. And we wish you all the best with your projects, and we cannot wait to see some of the stories. I know that's going to be amazing that you're doing, and I'm very excited about that particularly. And again, thank you for taking the time.
Of course. Thank you for
Get back
having
to
me.
making great movies.
Talk to you soon, and thank you for having me.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.